Every bad plan starts with a great shortcut, and Terran Vance's current shortcut was promising to be so spectacularly bad it might just redefine interstellar diplomacy, theology, and divorce law all at once. Red light strobed across Terran's face, painting his grin in shades of panic and adrenaline. Alarms were a smuggler's lullaby, but this one was singing Wagner. The junker's luck, his lovingly maintained rust bucket of a freighter, shuddered as another plasma bolt skimmed its port shield. Outside the reinforced canopy, the sleek, bio-armored cruisers of the Ashkorai Imperial Guard swarmed like angry hornets. "Anything you'd like to add to the plan, Terran?" shouted a tiny voice from the comms panel. His droid co-pilot, Unit 334, or TRI for short, had a knack for stating the obvious with maximum synthetic sarcasm. "Working on it!" Terran yelled back, yanking the flight stick hard to starboard, sending the junker's luck into a gut-wrenching spiral. The Ashkorai followed, their movements synchronized, each ship turning in perfect unison as if slave to a single mind. Too perfect. "They're anticipating everything I do." "Perhaps they have obtained a copy of your playbook," Try noted dryly. "It is not a particularly thick volume. Chapter 1, Fly Recklessly. Chapter 2, see Chapter 1. "Hilarious. I'm canceling your oil subscription," Terran grumbled, his eyes scanning the nav console. They were deep in Ashkorai space, having just lifted a data slate that was supposed to be worth a life-changing score. The score was a bust. The slate was encrypted with something that made Try's processors smoke. But the hornet's nest was very, very real. "There!" He pointed at a wavering anomaly on the screen. "An unmapped plasma conduit." "Unmapped, Captain, is another word for there be dragons here." "I'll take dragons over those hornets any day. It's a shortcut." "The conduit is charted as precursor technology. Designation unknown," Try recited, his voice flat. "It is ancient and decaying. Its exit vectors are unstable. One pre-Republic map suggests it terminates in the outer rim. A later survey indicates its terminus is inside a dead star. We are about to discover which is more accurate." "I love a good mystery." Terran slammed a coolant-stained hand on the throttle, pushing the junker's engines into the red. The ship groaned in protest as it aimed for the tear in space. "Hold on to your circuits." The transition was violent. Space twisted into a kaleidoscope of screaming color, and the ship felt like it was being squeezed through a straw. It was a shortcut, all right, but the problem with shortcuts is that they're only short until they're not. The exit vector was all wrong. Instead of punching out into clear space, they were spat out inside something. Stone. Ancient carved stone rushed past the canopy. "Try, where are we?" Terran gasped, wrestling with the controls. "Analysis suggests we have breached the outer wall of a pre-spaceflight era structure, specifically an Imperial temple on Ashkor Var. Structural integrity is, to use a human colloquialism, suboptimal." The ship's momentum was too great. With a final deafening shriek of tortured metal, the junker's luck tore through another, more ornate wall. The cockpit canopy, already stressed to its limit, spiderwebbed and then blew inwards in a shower of diamond-hard transparasteel. Terran threw up his arms to protect his face as the emergency force field flickered to life, wavering with the strain. When the chaos subsided, the ship was wedged halfway into a vast cavernous chamber. Dust motes danced in beams of ethereal light. Hooded insectoid figures, priests maybe, were frozen in a circle, their multi-jointed limbs raised in shock and horror. And in the center of that circle, floating a few inches off the polished obsidian floor, was a figure that stole the breath from his lungs. It was an Ashkorai, but not like any he had ever seen. The ones chasing him were encased in jagged bone plate armor. This one was bare. Her form was long and elegant, crafted from what looked like solidified light. A soft, internal luminescence flowed beneath her smooth, pearlescent skin, like slow-moving magma under ice. outlining a being of terrifying and delicate beauty. She was shedding a ghostly after-image of her hardened bone plate, the pieces dissolving into motes of light around her. She was vulnerable, power incarnate, sacred. Their eyes locked. Hers were like molten gold, wide with shock and a dawning cosmic fury. The royal guards, clad in obsidian and crimson armor, finally overcame their shock. They screamed, a high-pitched, chittering sound of pure outrage, and raised their plasma lances. But before they could fire, a voice slammed into Terran's mind. It wasn't just heard, it was felt. A physical pressure behind his eyes. A booming, resonant power that vibrated in the marrow of his bones and echoed out loud, filling the abrupt stillness of the temple. "You glimpsed my sacred form, human. Now you must marry me, or we'll both be executed." Terran, splattered with hydraulic fluid, blinking through the haze of shattered dreams and even more shattered ship parts, could only manage the most intelligent, well-thought-out response in his extensive vocabulary. I do?" The holding cell was the cleanest place Terran had ever been, which only made him feel dirtier. It was all seamless white surfaces and a soft ambient glow. No bars, just a glowing energy field for a door. He tried pacing, but after the 10th lap, he was just making himself dizzy. He sat on the edge of the sterile slab that passed for a bed and put his head in his hands. Married. He was married. To a glowing alien princess whose name he didn't even know. A sacred form. He'd heard whispers of it on the rim. An Ashkarai ritual so private that seeing it was a death sentence. Apparently with a weirdly romantic loophole. Then it hit him. It wasn't a thought or a sound. It was an invasive presence slamming into the private confines of his own head. It started as a cold knot in his stomach, a disciplined, razor-sharp fury that was utterly alien to his own chaotic emotions. It felt like the sharp, clean scent of chilled metal just before a lightning strike. He flinched, physically recoiling as if struck. The fury receded, replaced by a wave of something else, something heavier. Shame. It wasn't his own flustered embarrassment. This was a deep, ancestral shame. A humiliation so profound, it felt like a phantom weight pressing down on his shoulders. It tasted like bitter dust and brittle, ancient paper. It made his lungs feel tight, his breath shallow. He clutched his head. "Get out!" he muttered, the words feeling useless. "Get out of my head!" The pressure lessened slightly, but the presence remained. It was like knowing someone was standing right behind you in a pitch-black room. He could feel her, through the solid wall. In the adjacent cell, he presumed. She was there, a persistent, irritating, undeniable hum at the edge of his consciousness, a low-frequency vibration against his teeth. A new sensation flooded him, this one clearly not his. It was a sharp, throbbing headache, centered right behind his eyes, and beneath it, a frantic high-frequency vibration, like 1,000 tiny needles buzzing under the skin. My panic, he realized with a jolt. She's feeling my panic. He tried to push back, to wall off his own mind. He focused on a stupid song from his childhood, a dumb commercial jingle about sugary cereal. The mental pressure spiked with annoyance, feeling like a sudden sharp clang of dissonant bells. The cold fury returned, now directed squarely at the mental image of a cartoon rabbit eating colorful hoops. He got the distant, nonverbal impression of being told to shut up. "This is going to be a great marriage," he said to the empty room. "I can tell." The energy field at the door fizzled, and an Ashkarai guard in armor polished to a mirror sheen entered. It didn't look at him, its large, complex eyes fixed straight ahead. It chittered a series of commands in its own harsh language. Terran didn't understand the words, but the intent was clear. "Get up, come with me." He was led into an interrogation room that was just as sterile as his cell. On one side of a polished chrome table sat the source of his new mental affliction. Princess Nylavel was now encased in her formal bone plate, a deep indigo shell etched with silver filigree that denoted her royal status. She was imposing, every line of her body radiating coiled strength and regal displeasure. She didn't look at him, but he could feel her gaze on him through the bond. A mixture of cold fury, that soul-crushing shame, and a new, unwelcome spike of curiosity? It felt like the brief, faint scent of rain on dry earth, and it was suppressed so quickly he almost thought he'd imagined it. "Sit," she commanded. Her voice was a low, musical contralto, far less terrifying when it wasn't being physically blasted into his skull. Terran sat. He decided sarcasm was his only shield. "So, when do we need to register somewhere? I've never been married in this quadrant before. Do you have gift registries? Because the Junker's luck could use a new port stabilizer." Her golden eyes finally snapped to his. The glare was so intense, he felt a phantom chill. "Your flippancy is a stain upon this farce, human." "Hey, I'm not the one who made the weird law," he shot back. "I was just trying to avoid becoming a Jackson Pollock painting on the site of your grandpa's temple." "That temple is a holy site of ascension, and Empress Isola is my mother, not my grandfather." Before he could come up with a witty retort about her mother's decorating choices, the door hissed open again. This time, the person who entered was jarringly out of place. She was human, dressed in a severe gray uniform with the insignia of the Galactic Peace Council. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her expression was one of bored pragmatism. "Princess Nylavel," the woman said, her voice as dry as recycled air. "Terran Vance, I am Director Finch of the GPC's Special Operations Division." Nylavel inclined her head stiffly. "Director, your presence is unexpected." "The Ashkorai Empire has demanded Mr. Vance's immediate execution for his transgression," Finch stated, her tone as casual as if she were discussing shipping manifests. "The GPC, of course, recognizes the gravity of the offense. A violation of the Glimpse Edict is a clear casus belli, and we cannot afford a war with the Empire right now." Terran swallowed. "So, I'm dead. Great. Nice knowing you, Your Highness. Try not to glimpse any more random guys crashing through your ceiling." Finch ignored him, her gaze fixed on Nylavel. "However, the edict offers a single alternative path to resolution. Marriage. A binding of the observer to the observed. A path you have already invoked." "It was a reflex," Nylavel bit out, a wave of her self-loathing washing over Terran, tasting like bitter salt. "The law is absolute. The words were spoken. The bond is forged." "Indeed," Finch said, and the barest hint of a smile touched her lips. "And the GPC is prepared to honor that bond, publicly. We will announce that this union, while unconventional, satisfies the letter of your ancient and respected law. The Empire will be appeased. War will be averted." Terran narrowed his eyes. "What's the catch? People in gray uniforms never show up with good news unless there's a catch." Finch finally turned her attention to him. "The catch, Mr. Vance, is that you no longer exist. Nor do you, Princess, in your current capacity. A union this unique between an Ashkorai royal heir and a human criminal is a political liability if left to its own devices." She placed a datapad on the table and slid it into the center. "Therefore, you will be conscripted. Effective immediately, you are a two-person special operations unit under my direct command. Your lives are forfeit to the GPC. You are a deniable, disposable asset with a high potential for unique results. You will go where we send you, do what we command. In result, we provide you with a ship, equipment, and a continued existence." She paused, adding as an afterthought, "We have also salvaged what remains of your vessel. Your droid co-pilot, Unit 334, has been recovered. His personality core has been deemed a potential asset for morale. He has been installed as the integrated AI on your new vessel. Terran blinked. Try's okay? He is functional, Finch confirmed without a hint of warmth. The choice is yours, this arrangement or a shared execution chamber. The Empire would find that equally satisfying. Terran looked at Nylavel. Her face was unreadable, but through the bond, he felt a maelstrom. The shame, the fury, the sense of being trapped. But beneath it all, a sliver of something else. A warrior's pragmatism. This was survival. He felt her decision a split second before she spoke the words. "We accept your terms," Nylavel said, the sentence tasting like ash in her own mouth and in his. Finch nodded, a thin, bloodless smile touching her lips. "Excellent. Welcome to the GPC. Your training begins at 0600. Training was a generous term. State-sanctioned psychological torture felt more accurate. They stood in the center of a GPC combat simulator, a vast white grid that could become anything. For now, it was just empty space. Terran was knitted out in standard GPC light combat armor, which was uncomfortably snug in all the wrong places. Nylavel stood a few feet away, a picture of deadly grace in her own customized, sleeker version. She held an Ashkori pulse rifle with the ease of someone born with a weapon in their hands. "Good morning, Captain Vance, Princess Nylavel." Try's voice emanated from the room's speakers, as dry and dispassionate as ever. "I have been tasked with monitoring your vital signs and combat performance. I calculate a 91% probability of this ending in mutual frustration." "Noted, Try," Terran grumbled. "The objective is to neutralize all hostile targets," Finch's voice echoed, overriding the droids. "Begin simulation." The grid flickered, and they were suddenly in a grimy back alley of a space station, shipping containers providing ample cover. Robotic drones, sleek and silver, zipped into view from both ends of the alley. "Follow my lead, human," Nylavel ordered, her voice tight. "Provide suppressing fire on my mark." "Sure thing, Princess," Terran said, raising his standard-issue blaster rifle. "Just try not to get your bone plate scuffed." He felt a spike of her annoyance, sharp and clean, like the sting of pure alcohol. It was a disaster. She moved with the economy of a predator, each step deliberate, each shot striking a vital drone component. But she expected him to be a soldier, to follow patterns and obey commands. Terran was a smuggler. He did chaos. "The subject's tactical synergy is currently rated as suboptimal," Try's voice commented calmly as Terran nearly tripped over a piece of debris while Nylavel was executing a perfect flanking maneuver. "Probability of mutual fratricide has increased to 73%. "You are undisciplined," she snarled, ducking behind a crate as plasma bolts sizzled over her head. He could feel her frustration bleeding into him, a hot, irritating buzz that made his trigger finger itch. "And you're rigid," he shot back, rolling away from an explosion. "They're machines. They're learning your perfect, predictable patterns." "My patterns are the art of Ashkori warfare, perfected over millennia." "Well, millennia of you just got flanked." She glanced back and saw he was right. A drone had anticipated her move and was closing in on her blind spot. The psychic bond, which had so far been a source of mutual irritation, suddenly flared with a different kind of signal. He felt a surge of her alarm, not as an emotion, but as a pure tactical awareness that felt like a sudden drop in temperature. At the same time, she must have felt his sudden chaotic spark of an idea, a feeling like a firecracker going off in a library. Down. The thought wasn't a word, just a pure raw intention that he projected through the link, a feeling of sudden plunging weight. Without hesitating, Nylavel dropped into a low crouch. A split second later, Terran fired his rifle, not at the drone, but at a volatile pressure conduit on the wall just behind it. The conduit exploded, engulfing the drone in a cloud of blue fire. The remaining drones recalibrated, their targeting system struggling to account for such a deliberately illogical act. "Now!" Terran yelled. The simulator suddenly threw a logic-breaking scenario at them. The floor dissolved, replaced by a series of rapidly shifting platforms over a bottomless digital pit. More drones appeared, these ones equipped with personal shields. A logic-breaking scenario designed to overwhelm. Nylavel's discipline was useless here. There was no solid ground, no predictable enemy, but Terran's chaos thrived. He felt the surge of power as she readied a charge shot from her pulse rifle. It felt like the air growing thick, like the moments before a storm breaks. He didn't need to look. He leaped to a new platform, drawing the fire of 2 drones. Left! High! Her intent slammed into him, a sensation as clear and sharp as a thrown knife. He ducked without thinking as her supercharged plasma bolt screamed over his head, overloading one drone's shield and vaporizing it. He felt her preparing to jump to a platform that was just about to vanish. "No, wait!" he projected, a feeling of warning, of pulling back, like a physical hand on her shoulder. She aborted her jump mid-stride, landing solidly as the platform she'd been aiming for blinked out of existence. They didn't speak for the rest of the simulation. They didn't need to. It was a brutal, silent ballet. He felt her intent to strike. She felt his to distract. Her lethal skill became the scalpel. His chaos became the hammer. They were a seamless unit, moving in perfect, lethal concert. When the last drone clattered to the gridded floor, and the simulation ended, they were left standing in the white emptiness, chests heaving. Probability of mutual fratricide has decreased to a statistically insignificant 6%, Try's voice announced into the silence. I am updating my projections. This may be interesting. Terran looked at Nylavel. Her golden eyes were wide, not with fury this time, but with a dawning, grudging understanding. The psychic space between them was quiet, humming with a strange, new resonance. Simulation complete, Finch's voice announced, devoid of any surprise. Performance acceptable. Your first assignment briefing is in 1 hour. Do try to shower, Mr. Vance. Your biosignature is pungent. Your target, Director Finch said, her face a stoic hologram flickering above the briefing table on their new ship, the Reluctant Vow, is a Jorgan pirate ship known as Brackar. An image of a hulking alien with 2 massive arms and a smaller secondary pair folded across his chest appeared next to her. His face looked like it was carved from granite, split by a nasty-looking scar. Subject's threat level is significant, Try's synthesized voice added from the ship's main console. He is also wanted for egregious violations of galactic fashion sensibilities. Brackar operates from a hollowed-out asteroid in the Tartarus Nebula colloquially known as the Gut, Finch continued, ignoring the droid. He has been raiding Ashkorai commercial freighters, which is causing a diplomatic headache. Your mission is to infiltrate the Gut, neutralize Brackar, and destabilize his operation. Finch paused. His command ship, the Grave Robber, is also fitted with a prototype cloaking device the GPC has a vested interest in. Acquiring it would result in a discretionary bonus. So, it's a smash and grab with a side of regicide, Terran quipped, leaning back in his chair. He was trying to project an air of nonchalant cool, but Nylavel, sitting ramrod straight across from him, could likely feel the nervous flutter in his stomach. The psychic link was a constant low-grade hangover. Right now, he was getting a thrum of her focused intensity, overlaid with a faint lingering disgust aimed squarely at him. He'd spent the hour before the briefing celebrating their new ship with a loud off-key rendition of a spacer shanty he'd picked up on Tortuga. Vocal performance registered at a pitch consistency of 12%, Try had commented at the time. I would advise against a career in the musical arts, Captain. Her psychic glare had been palpable. Your assessment is crude, but not inaccurate, Mr. Vance, Finch said. You will be using your old vessel, the Junker's Luck. GPC intelligence indicates it matches the profile of scavengers Brackar sometimes hires for salvage work. It will get you inside. From there, your unique synergy will have to suffice." The hologram flickered and vanished. Nylavel stood. "I will calibrate our equipment." "Hey, hold on," Terran said. "We should talk strategy. A real plan, not just I shoot things with perfect aim and you blow stuff up by accident." She turned, her golden eyes unreadable. "The plan is the mission objective. We infiltrate, we eliminate the target, we retrieve the device. There is nothing more to discuss." "Right, and what happens when the plan goes sideways? Because it always goes sideways." "Then we adapt," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. But Terran felt a flicker of something through the bond. Not an emotion, but a physical sensation, like the feeling of a floor shifting slightly beneath his feet. A tiny tremor of uncertainty she quickly suppressed. He grinned. "See? We're bonding already." The spike of pure, unadulterated annoyance he received in reply was so strong it made him wince, feeling like the taste of burnt coffee. The Junker's luck lived up to its name, coasting into the docking bay of the Gut on a cloud of leaking coolant and false credentials. The asteroid base was a pirate's paradise, a chaotic mess of welded-together ship hulls, flickering neon signs, and the percussive boom of a cantina that never closed. Getting past the outer security had been easy. The hard part was navigating the station's interior without getting shanked for the change in their pockets. "Stay close," Nylavel murmured, her hand resting near the hilt of the vibroblade concealed at her side. "Don't have to tell me twice," Terran whispered back. The air was thick with the smells of unwashed aliens, spilled ale, and the sharp scent of failing power converters. Their bond, which had been a constant background hum, suddenly sharpened. It was a psychic tripwire. Terran felt a prickle of hostile intent from a dark alcove to their right, a feeling like cold slime trickling down his spine. At the same time, Nyla felt a flicker of avarice from a hulking reptilian creature leaning against a wall ahead, a raw, greasy sensation. They didn't speak. She subtly shifted her weight, positioning herself to intercept the creature ahead. Terran casually angled his body, placing himself between her and the alcove. A long growl emanated from the darkness, but the unseen lurker thought better of it and slunk away. The reptilian grunted and turned his attention elsewhere. The moment passed. It had been as smooth and silent as breathing. Their objective was Brackar's throne room, located in the central command spire. According to the schematics, the most direct route was through the main causeway. The most direct route was also a death trap. "Service ducts," Terran breathed, pointing to a grimy ventilation grate near the floor. "Always a service duct." Nylavel looked at the grate, then at him. He felt a wave of her aristocratic distaste, cool and smooth like polished marble. "We are warriors of the Galactic Peace Council, not vermin." "Right now, vermin have a longer life expectancy," he retorted. "Your call, Princess. Grand entrance or dirty shortcut?" He felt her internal struggle, pride versus pragmatism. Pragmatism won. With a sigh that he felt as a weary slump in his own shoulders, she knelt and helped him pry the grate open. The maintenance duct was even tighter and grimier than he'd imagined. They moved in single file, Terran in the lead, the metallic tang of rust and decay filling his nostrils. The noise of the station faded away, replaced by the echo of their own movements, and the sound of their breathing in the confined space. The darkness was absolute. The external chaos was gone. All Terran was aware of was the scrape of his armor against the metal, the soft clicks of Nylavel's armored feet behind him, and the constant, undeniable thrum of their psychic connection. It was no longer a jumble of competing emotions. In the shared silence of darkness, it settled into a single frequency of heightened awareness. Their shared fear felt like the taste of cold iron, their focus a sharp point of pressure behind the eyes. It was claustrophobic, it was terrifying, and in the strangest possible way, it was intimate. He was more aware of her presence right now in this filthy metal tube than he had been at any point since this whole insane mess began. He could feel the steady, disciplined rhythm of her heart, a stark contrast to the frantic drumming of his own. For a moment, he wasn't a cocky smuggler, and she wasn't a haughty princess. They were just two people in the dark, trying to survive. Their cover was blown the moment they dropped from the ceiling into Brackar's private armory. An alarm blared, triggered by a motion sensor they hadn't seen on the outdated schematics. "So much for the quiet approach," Terran muttered, dropping into a crouch. Nylavel was already moving. "Plan went sideways, human. Adapt." The door burst open, and a flood of Jorgan pirates poured in, howling and brandishing jagged metal blades and spitting plasma pistols. It was a dance. Terran felt Nylavel's intent to lunge right, a sharp forward surging feeling like a released spring. He didn't think, he just moved left, laying down a spread of cover fire that forced 3 pirates to duck behind a weapons locker, giving her a clear path. She flowed past them like a deadly river, her vibro blade a silver blur. She disarmed one, disabled another with a precise strike to a nerve cluster, and kicked the third into a bulkhead with enough force to dent the metal. A plasma bolt screamed toward his head. He felt the warning from her, a sharp, piercing spike of alarm that felt like a high-pitched whine just below the level of hearing, a microsecond before the shot was even fired. He dropped flat, the bolt searing the air where his head had been. As he fell, he fired his blaster blindly behind him. He felt her surge of grim satisfaction, a sensation like cool, clean water. He'd hit his target. They moved through the chaos of the throne room like two halves of a single organism. There were no commands, no spoken words. He would see an opening and feel her already moving to exploit it. She would sense a threat to his flank, and her pulse rifle would be there to neutralize it before he was even aware of the danger. Her Ashkarite discipline provided the lethal, perfect strikes. His human improvisation created the openings, the chaos that their enemies couldn't predict. It was brutal. It was effective. It was, in its own violent way, beautiful. Finally, only one target remained. Brackar himself. The Jorgan king roared, snatching a heavy plasma cannon from its mount on the wall. He was big, slow, but he packed a hell of a punch. Nylavel charged, blade held low. Brackar tracked her, the cannon whining as it powered up. He was focused entirely on her. Too focused. Terran saw his shot. He also saw a secondary pirate he'd missed, popping up from behind the throne. Pistol aimed at Nylavel's back. There was no time for a warning, no time for a thought. Nylavel felt a sudden, all-consuming wave of pure, selfless panic from Terran, an emotion so raw and powerful it momentarily staggered her. And then he was moving. Terran dove, tackling her to the ground, yanking her out of the path of both the pirate's shot and Brackar's cannon blast. The cannon discharge blew a molten crater in the wall where she had been. The pirate's shot, however, found a new target. Terran cried out, a sharp, ragged sound as a bolt of plasma slammed into his upper arm, melting through the armor and searing the flesh beneath. Nylavel, recovering instantly, rolled to her feet. The bond flooded with Terran's agony, but also with a clear projected sensation, an intense dry heat, a feeling of metal stressed to its breaking point. Brackar's weapon, overheating. She saw the cannon glowing cherry red, its emergency heat vents screaming. With a final fluid motion, she threw her vibroblade. It spun end over end, striking the cannon's primary power cell with a sickening crunch. The resulting explosion was spectacular. When the smoke cleared, Brackar was gone, and his pirates were either unconscious or fleeing. Victory! But all Nylavel could feel was the searing, white-hot agony radiating from Terran's arm, as sharp and real as if it were her own. Aboard the reluctant Vow, the medbay was silent except for the hiss of a dermal regenerator. Terran was strapped to a biobed, his face pale and beaded with sweat. "Captain Vance's vital signs are stabilizing," Try's voice announced from a wall-mounted speaker. "Pain indicators remain at unacceptable levels. Suggestion: apply more painkillers." Nylavel ignored the droid, her hands surprisingly steady, as she applied a salve to the nasty, bubbling plasma burn on Terran's bicep. But instead, she was in turmoil. The physical bond was a raw, open nerve, transmitting every spike of his pain directly into her consciousness. It was a nauseating, relentless agony that made her own muscles clench in sympathy. There was no filter, no distance. His suffering was hers. "It's not so bad," Terran managed to grit out, though a fresh wave of pain made him gasp. "Do not lie," she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "I can feel it, Terran." She'd never used his first name with such directness before. It hung in the air between them. The shared pain was a brutal but effective truth serum. There was no room for pretense, for her aristocratic disdain or his cocky bravado. All that was left was the searing reality of the wound. Forgetting her station, her pride, her disgust at his chaotic nature, she worked with the focused skill of a trained field medic. Finally, she administered a heavy-duty painkiller. The relief was almost instantaneous. The agony flooding the bond subsided to a dull, manageable throb. Terran's head lolled back against the bed, a goofy, intoxicated grin spreading across his face. "Captain Vance's endorphin levels are now equivalent to those of a Jovian pleasure slug," Try noted. "Coherent speech is unlikely for the next 2 hours." "Wow," Terran mumbled, proving Try's point. "That's the good stuff. GPC dental plan must be amazing." He looked at her, his eyes unfocused. "Hey, N." "You should rest," she said, starting to turn away. "No, wait." He looked at her, his usual defenses washed away by the painkillers. "Why? The law? The whole marry the stranger who sees you glowing thing? It's insane. No offense." She paused. Normally, such a question would be met with a stony silence or a sharp rebuke. But the pain they had just shared had changed something, and in his drug-addled state, she didn't feel his usual mockery or judgment. Through the bond, she felt a current of genuine, simple curiosity. It felt clean, like clear water. She found herself answering, the words coming out in a low murmur. "It was not always the law. It was a decree issued by my mother, Empress Isola, centuries ago." She looked at a sterile steel bulkhead, but she was seeing a gilded throne room miles and years away. "Ostensibly, it was to protect the sanctity of the Ascension, to prevent our most vulnerable moment from being profaned, to bind any witness to the throne, ensuring their silence and loyalty through an unbreakable bond." "Unbreakable, huh?" Terran slurred. "Sounds more like a leash." Nylavel's head snapped back to him. He was just a dumb, high human making an off-the-cuff remark, but he had unknowingly hit the very center of the target. She found she couldn't deny it. "Even if I find it archaic," she admitted. The confession felt like a physical release, a crack forming in a sheet of ice she hadn't known she was trapped beneath. He felt it too, a sudden easing of pressure in the bond. Terran just smiled his sleepy, lopsided grin. See? We agree on something. Maybe this marriage thing can work after all. He was asleep before she could formulate a reply. She stood there for a long moment, watching him, feeling the quiet, steady hum of the bond now that the pain had faded. It was still an intrusion, still a chain, but for the first time, it didn't feel entirely cold. Their success in the gut earned them a promotion, or as Finch put it in her deadpan briefing, an assignment commensurate with your newly demonstrated capabilities. Lord Arian, Minister of Antiquities for the Ashkorai Empire, has made a clandestine request for asylum, Finch's hologram stated. A picture of a gaunt, elderly Ashkorai with weary eyes appeared. He claims to possess proof of systematic corruption at the highest levels of the imperial court, specifically implicating Empress Isola herself. Terran, his arm now in a light medical brace, whistled. That's not just a hornet's nest. That's kicking the galactic hornet's nest while it's on fire. Nylavel was silent, but he felt a cold dread wash through the bond, a sensation like swallowing ice water. This wasn't some pirate king. This was her mother, her empress. Orion will be attending the Celestial Concordance Gala on the orbital station, Athelgard, Finch continued. It is a neutral territory. Your mission is to make contact, verify his intelligence, and extract him. You will attend the gala as a newly married diplomatic couple. Your situation provides the perfect cover. A gala infiltration, Try's voice interjected. My databases indicate such events have a 98% probability of resulting in either a dramatic unmasking or a chandelier falling. Please be mindful of overhead fixtures. Finch ignored the AI, but she looked directly at Terran. By the way, Mr. Vance, a commendation has been added to your file for unorthodox but effective tactical adaptability. It seems there is a place for human chaos in our operations after all. The hologram vanished, leaving them in a thick, uncomfortable silence. She is my mother, Nylavel finally said, her voice barely a whisper. And she's the one who chained you to a loud-mouthed human smuggler for the rest of your life, Terran countered gently. You said it yourself. The law is archaic. Maybe it's time someone proved it. He felt her conflict, a war between a daughter's ingrained loyalty and a warrior's burgeoning desire for justice. He didn't push. He just let her feel his own steady, uncomplicated resolve through the bond. We do the job, we see what the old man has, then we decide. Athelgard was the pinnacle of galactic luxury. The gala was a glittering affair, filled with diplomats and dignitaries from 100 worlds, all mingling under a crystal dome that offered a breathtaking view of the nebula outside. Terran felt ridiculously out of place in the formal black tunic Finch's quartermaster had provided. Nylavel, however, looked every inch the princess. She wore a gown of deep violet silk that caught the light over her bone plate, her silver royal filigree catching the light. The forced proximity, the pretense of being a genuine couple, was a live wire crackling between them. Every time his hand brushed hers, the psychic bond flared with a jolt of shared awareness. Try to look like you belong here, she murmured as they entered the grand ballroom. I'm trying to look like a guy who just married a 10-foot-tall warrior princess who glows in the dark. I think I'm nailing overwhelmed and intimidated, he whispered back. He felt a flicker of her amusement through the bond, a rare and precious thing that felt like a warm spark in his chest. To maintain their cover, they had to mingle, and on Athelgard, mingling meant dancing. A slow, haunting melody began to play, and dozens of couples moved to the center of the floor. Oh no, Terran said. No, I don't dance. I step on feet. It's a whole thing. We must, Nylavel insisted. her grip on his arm tightening. To refuse would be an insult. With a sense of impending doom, he let her lead him onto the dance floor. He placed a hand on her waist, the silk of her gown cool against his skin. She placed a hand on his shoulder. The contact was electric. As they began to move, something strange happened. He was a clumsy dancer, and she was likely trained in complex formal Ashkorai court dances. They should have been a mess, but the bond guided them. He felt her intention to turn a half a second before she moved. She felt his awkward shift in weight and compensated for it, turning his stumble into a surprisingly elegant sweep. The physical closeness and the psychic link blurred into a single, seamless experience. They moved as one, not through practice, but through pure, instinctual connection. For a few minutes, the mission, Finch, the Empress, all of it, faded away. There was only the music, the slow spin under the starlight, and the shared, startling warmth that hummed between them. It was a low, pleasant thrum that felt like sunlight on stone, drowning out their anxiety, a pocket of impossible peace in the midst of their chaotic lives. It was the first time the bond hadn't felt like a chain or a tool, but like a connection. He looked down at her, and she was already looking up at him, her golden eyes wide with a shared surprise. The moment was broken by a discreet cough. An elderly Ashkorai with weary eyes stood beside them. Lord Orion. "A beautiful dance," the old minister said, his voice a dry rustle. "For a most unexpected couple. May I have a word?" They found a secluded alcove overlooking the nebula. Lord Orion didn't waste time. "The Empress is a tyrant who mistakes control for peace," he began, his voice trembling with age and fear. "You, Princess, are living proof." "Proof of what, my lord?" Nylavel asked, her voice dangerously level. Orion looked from her to Terran. "The glimpse edict. It is not a tool of sanctity. It is her most effective weapon. A way to neutralize powerful heirs, to bind rivals in politically disadvantaged or chaotic bonds, shackling them, removing them as threats to her power." He confirmed everything she had suspected, everything Terran had flippantly guessed. But then he revealed something even more, a secret buried for centuries. "The bond is, as you know, biologically absolute. It is a fundamental law of our psychic makeup. It cannot be broken without causing catastrophic psychic feedback, killing the Ashkorai in the bond." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But the law, the edict itself, is not merely a decree. It's an artifact, a psychic anchor, hidden in plain sight in the throne room. It amplifies and enforces every bond forged under the edict." He produced a small data chip of spun glass fiber. "The Empress knows, I suspect. I will not survive the night if I remain. This chip contains everything. Proof of her manipulations, and more importantly, the schematics for the Imperial Palace. As Minister of Antiquities, it was my duty and my passion to study the palace's original architecture, long before my Empress retrofitted it with her modern security. These show forgotten service tunnels, blind spots in the psychic sensor grid, a way in." He pressed the chip into Terran's hand. "There is only one way to truly break the chains she forges," Orion said, his eyes filled with a terrible certainty. "The law is physically anchored to the Empress herself through the artifact. If the Empress dies, the artifact shatters, and every single bond forged by the Glimpse Edict across the entire empire will be instantly and cleanly nullified. He gave a small, sad smile. You will be free. Freedom. The word echoed in the silence of the reluctant Vow's cockpit. They were back in the ship. Lord Orion safely hidden in a GPC safehouse, the data chip resting on the console between them. Analysis of the data chip is complete, Try announced. The data is confirmed. It contains schematics, blackmail material, and a surprisingly thorough history of Ashkori plumbing. A truly multifaceted document. Freedom. It was right there. A path to assassinate the Empress, shatter the artifact, and break the bond. Terran could go back to his life. Smuggling, running, owing money to all the wrong people. The life he thought he wanted. Nylavel stared at the star-strewn emptiness outside the canopy, but her gaze was distant. Terran could feel her turmoil. It was a chaotic storm of emotions. The horror of patricide, the hope of liberation, the crushing weight of her duty to her people, warring with the burning desire to be her own person. And underneath it all, a deep, aching despair that felt like a cold stone in his own gut. Captain, Try said, his voice flatly logical, the most prudent course of action is to deliver this intelligence to Director Finch. It represents significant political leverage for the GPC. A direct assault on the Imperial Palace, based on my calculations, carries a success probability of, well, it is very low. Terran looked at the chip. He looked at her. He saw his freedom. He could take the chip to Finch, let the GPC handle it. He could walk away, finally unchained from this bizarre, infuriating, intoxicating connection. But as he felt the cold tendrils of Nylavel's hopelessness wrapping around his own heart, he realized something with stunning, terrifying clarity. He didn't want his old freedom. Not anymore. What good was being free if she wasn't? What good was the silence in his own head if it meant he could no longer feel the steady, reassuring hum of her presence? It was the most illogical, irrational, and deeply human decision he had ever made. Finch would just use this as leverage, he said, his voice quiet but firm. She'd file it away, a knife to hold at the Empire's throat. Nothing would happen. You'd still be trapped. Nylavel turned to him, her golden eyes glistening with unshed tears. What else can we do? To strike at the Empress is to invite civil war. It is treason of the highest order. Sometimes treason is just a fancy word for doing the right thing, he said, picking up the data chip. He didn't offer it to her. He held it for both of them. Besides, they can't court-martial us if we're already rogue. He felt the shock ripple through her, followed by a dawning, terrifying spark of hope. I am disabling our GPC transponder, Captain, Try said, a beat of silence passing before he spoke. My programming dictates I should file a report. However, my sarcasm subroutines find this course of action far more stimulating. Let us proceed. Terran grinned. We're going to cut the head off the snake. Her answering feeling wasn't one of agreement or disagreement. It was a pure, simple, and overwhelming wave of trust. It felt solid and warm, a bedrock beneath the chaos. Going rogue was surprisingly easy. The hard part was getting to Ashkor Var undetected. The Imperial fleet has the planet locked down tighter than a cryovault, Terran muttered, studying the holographic display of Orion's schematics. But you have found a flaw, Nylavel finished for him. She was standing behind his pilot's chair, one hand resting on the back of it. The contact was grounding, a silent affirmation of their shared purpose. Orion's ancient charts show a network of decommissioned magnetic conduits. If I can match our shield frequency to the conduit's EM field, we can ride the current right into the planet's upper atmosphere. It'll be like flushing ourselves down an imperial toilet." "Your analogies are consistently disgusting," she noted, but he felt her approval, a small, steady current in the bond, and effective. The ride was rough, a nauseating slalom through crackling magnetic fields, but Terran's daredevil piloting got them through. They slipped past the Imperial blockade like a ghost. Using Orion's schematics, they landed the reluctant Vow in a forgotten grotto miles from the palace, and proceeded on foot through service tunnels that smelled of dust and time. The palace's outer defenses were psychic, low-level sentries whose minds skimmed for any hint of hostile intent or emotional distress. "We'll never get past them," Nylavel whispered as they crouched behind a support pillar, watching two guards patrol a corridor ahead. "They will feel our purpose." "Then we give them something else to feel," Terran said, closing his eyes. He focused on the bond, not as a receiver, but as a broadcaster. He dredged up the most boring, mundane feeling he could muster: loyalty. Not the fierce, protective loyalty he felt for her, but the dull, placid loyalty of someone doing a boring job. He imagined filling out paperwork. He imagined polishing boots. He pushed that feeling into the bond, a wave of pure, unadulterated boredom. He felt Nylavel catch on immediately. She took his psychic projection and refined it, shaping it with her own immense control. She layered in feelings of Ashkori duty, of quiet pride in serving the Empress. Together, they projected a psychic blind spot, a small bubble of absolute, uninteresting calm and loyalty. The mental strain was immense. It was a blinding headache, the taste of static on his tongue. He felt a throb of pain behind Nylavel's eyes, a mirror of his own, but it worked. They walked out from behind the pillar and strode down the corridor right past the guards. The sentries' large, complex eyes slid over them without a flicker of interest. They were just two more loyal servants in a palace full of them, invisible in plain sight. They slipped through the palace's forgotten ways, a silent two-person phantom, their shared deception a shield that grew heavier with each step. Finally, they reached a set of massive obsidian doors, intricately carved with the history of the Ashkori people. The throne room. "Ready?" Terran whispered, his hand on the door's release. He didn't need her verbal answer. He felt her response through the bond, a solid, unwavering core of pure, cold resolve. He opened the doors. The throne room was a cavern of luminous crystal and polished obsidian, and on a throne carved from a single massive geode sat Empress Isola. She wasn't surprised. She was waiting. "Nylavel," the Empress said, her voice a melodic, disappointed sigh that echoed in the vast chamber. "I felt the strain of your little deception the moment you entered my palace. It was a clever trick, crude, but clever." She was ancient, her outer plating the color of bleached bone, but her golden eyes burned with a timeless predatory intelligence. Beside her throne, a lattice-like artifact pulsed with a soft, malevolent light, the psychic anchor Lord Orion had described. Her gaze dismissed Terran entirely, as if he were a piece of dirt Nylavel had tracked in on her boot. "I raised you to be a leader, a worthy heir. Instead, you return to my home with this feral pet, guided by the whispers of a traitor." "You raised me to be a tool," Nylavel countered, her voice ringing with a strength Terran had never heard from her before. "Your edict is not about order, it's about control. You have shackled your own people, your own blood, to maintain your power." The Empress smiled. a cold, serene expression that was more terrifying than any snarl.
Control is order, my dear. The galaxy is a chaotic, messy place. I have perfected a system that eliminates that chaos, that ensures loyalty, that maintains our strength.
She gestured lazily at the pulsing artifact.
I have brought peace for 1,000 years through this perfect, absolute system, and you would throw it all away for the sake of one misbegotten bond with a primitive.
She rose from her throne, her power unfurling like a physical shroud.
But this is a teachable moment. I will now demonstrate the ultimate flaw in your sentimental alliance.
She didn't move. She didn't raise a weapon. She simply attacked. The Empress seized their bond, turning it into a weapon against them. A tidal wave of pure, amplified fear crashed into Terran's mind. A freezing, drowning sensation drawn from 1,000 trapped souls. It was the collective terror of a species, focused into a single point of agony. He staggered, crying out, clutching his chest. Simultaneously, Nylavel was flooded with his insecurities. Every failure, every doubt, every moment of his life he'd felt like a fraud and a failure, all amplified and twisted into a crippling barrage of self-loathing that felt like shards of broken glass grinding in her soul. She faltered, her knees buckling, her proud warrior spirit drowning in his human chaos.
You see, the Empress purred, your connection is your weakness. I can pull it apart thread by painful thread.
They were losing. They were being torn apart from the inside out. But as Terran knelt on the floor, drowning in fear, one thought cut through the psychic noise. Nylavel. He gritted his teeth. He wasn't a warrior, he wasn't a hero. He was just a stubborn, smart-mouthed smuggler who had found something, someone, worth fighting for. He couldn't fight the Empress with power or discipline, but he could fight her with loyalty. He focused on that one simple feeling. His pure, unconditional, defiant loyalty to the woman kneeling beside him. He took that feeling and pushed it into the bond with all his might. It wasn't a psychic attack. It was an anchor. A raw, human, stubborn refusal to let her go. I'm here. I'm not leaving. Nylavel felt it. A single steady light in the storm of his amplified insecurities. His loyalty. His trust. It was not an Ashkorite concept of honor or duty. It was simpler, purer, and in that moment, it was stronger. Feeling that pure, unconditional support, her own spirit roared back to life. She met his loyalty with her own fierce, untamed protectiveness. Their bond, which the Empress had tried to turn into a weapon against them, suddenly solidified. It became a shield forged of Ashkorite discipline and human defiance. The psychic onslaught of the Empress washed over them, finding no purchase. With a scream of fury, the Empress gathered her power for one final, overwhelming attack. She ripped a shard of pure, deadly psychic energy from the air and hurled it, not at Terran, but at her own daughter. It was a killing blow. Terran saw it. Nylavel saw it. There was no time for a thought, no time for a plan. There was only instinct. Without hesitation, Terran dove in front of Nylavel, taking the full devastating impact of the psychic shard. Pain, and then nothing. A horrifying void opened in Nylavel's mind where Terran's presence had been. The bond, their constant connection, was filled with a screaming, fading static. She felt his life extinguishing like a snuffed flame. The silence that followed was unbearable. Grief, cold and absolute, washed over her. And then came the rage, a rage unlike anything she had ever known. It was the fury of a warrior, the grief of a partner, the righteous anger of a soul that had finally found its other half, only to have it torn away. She looked at her mother, the Empress, whose face was a mask of cold triumph, and Nylavel unleashed her full, untamed power. It was not the disciplined energy of her training. It was a raw, untempered nova of her ascended soul. Light erupted from her, a blinding sun of golden fury. The Empress's eyes widened in shock as the wave of pure power hit her, dissolving her ancient form into dust and memory. The power did not stop there. It slammed into the lattice-like artifact beside the throne, and with a sound that was both a chime and a shriek, the psychic anchor of the Glimpse Edict shattered into 1,000,000 glittering shards. Across the Empire, 1,000 unwanted bonds, 1,000 psychic chains dissolved into nothing. But Nylavel barely noticed. The throne room was silent, the rage spent. She dropped to her knees beside Terran's still form. He was moments from death. She could feel the last embers of his life fading. She was free. The law was broken. The bond was gone. And the freedom was empty. The silence in her mind was a wound. She had her choice, a life of solitary freedom or a life with him. It was no choice at all. Kneeling over him, she made her choice. She began to chant, the words not of the ancient, cruel law, but of a different ritual, a forbidden one, a forgotten ceremony of true bonding, of a willing gift. She placed her hands on his chest. Her luminous aura, which had blazed so brightly, began to pour from her into him. It was not a trickle, it was not a torrent. She poured a significant portion of her own life force, her ascended power, her very essence, into his dying body. The glow of her own form visibly dimmed, her pearlescent skin losing some of its luster. It was a sacrifice of immense cost. She had anchored her Ashkorai longevity, once a river flowing for millennia, to the flickering candle of his human lifespan. Her forever was now his. And as his heart began to beat again, as color returned to his face, the bond reformed. But it was different. It was not an intrusion. It was not a chain. There was no cold fury, no phantom shame. There was just a warm, welcome, steady hum in the back of their souls. It was a quiet space they had built together, a place of shared strength and accepted vulnerability. Terran's eyes fluttered open. He looked up at her diminished but still beautiful light. He felt the new bond, the warmth, the choice in it. He felt her sacrifice, an anchor of mortality that was terrifying and beautiful all at once. He smiled, a weak but genuine grin. "So," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "does this mean we're officially dating?" Nylavel let out a sound he had never heard from her before, a soft, choked laugh that was the most beautiful thing in the galaxy. She leaned down, her forehead touching his. The bond between them resonated with a shared quiet joy. "Yes, Terran," she whispered back, the feeling of her love a warm, steady glow against the new shared horizon of their lives. "I suppose it does."